children, my fortune, and even my name, but the game they were playing had rules they didn't understand, because I wrote them. Before I tell you how I got my revenge, hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. I am Elena Scott, and this is my story. For 20 years, I built my company from the ground up. I poured in sleepless nights, missed birthdays, and countless sacrifices. My husband, Adrian, was by my side at first, or so I thought. Together, we dreamed of leaving a legacy for our children, Mia and Jordan. But dreams can rot when greed creeps in. It began with whispers, boardroom meetings I wasn't invited to, documents I hadn't signed but somehow carried my name. Then came the looks. Cold, sharp stares from people I once trusted, like my sister-in-law Valerie, who smiled too widely when she called me the past. The final blow hit on the day I entered the office only to find my name stripped from the wall. My husband stood there with Valerie and my so-called best friend, Clara. They told me I was no longer CEO, no longer part of the company I had bled for. Worse still, Adrian's voice was cold when he said, "Elena, the children will stay with me. It's better this way." That was the day I realized I had lost everything, except myself. I walked out of that office with my heart breaking but my face calm. The air outside felt heavier than the betrayal inside. How could Adrian, the man I once trusted with my dreams, steal everything I built? How could Clara, the friend I called a sister, stand there smiling as my name disappeared from the wall? I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But instead, I stayed silent. Silence was not weakness, it was survival. They thought I was broken, a woman stripped of power, mother, and dignity. What they didn't know was that silence hides sharp eyes and sharper plans. At home, the pain grew worse. Adrian kept Mia and Jordan away, saying they needed stability. His words burned deeper than fire. My children were not possessions, yet he held them like trophies of his victory. Nights were the hardest. I stared at old family photos, wondering how love could twist into betrayal so cruel. But every tear that fell hardened into something else, resolve. If they thought erasing me would end my story, they were wrong. I didn't know how yet, but I promised myself one truth: it would not stay erased. Days passed, but the sting of that betrayal never faded. I noticed how quickly the story spread. Friends who once called daily now avoided me. Business partners spoke in half sentences, their eyes shifting away like I was already forgotten. The silence around me was louder than any words. Then came the whispers. A neighbor mentioned overhearing Clara at lunch, bragging that I was too weak to run a company of such size. Another said Valerie laughed in the salon, claiming I had finally been put in my place. Every whisper cut like glass. But instead of collapsing, I listened carefully. Whispers tell the truth hidden behind lies. I began writing everything down: times, names, words spoken in arrogance. These whispers became threads, and threads always lead somewhere. Adrian acted as if he had one. He dressed sharper, drove a new car, and carried himself like a man untouchable. But I noticed details: the way his phone never left his hand, the secret meetings late at night, the papers he kept locked in his study. Love revenge stories? Subscribe now. We drop new ones every week, raw, emotional, and full of justice. Don't miss the next chapter. They thought I was gone. They thought I was powerless. But I was still watching, still listening, and already pulling the first string. The house felt emptier than ever. Mia's laughter and Jordan's footsteps had once filled every corner, but now the silence screamed at me. Adrian allowed short visits, always supervised, always controlled. When I hugged them, I could feel how quickly they were slipping away, their young minds shaped by his poison. "Mom, Dad says you don't care about the company anymore," Mia whispered once, her little eyes searching mine. My heart cracked. Adrian had already started planting lies. I smiled for her, even though inside I wanted to weep. "Never believe everything you hear," I told her gently. But she was only a child. How could she understand betrayal this deep? After each visit, I sat alone in my quiet room, staring at their photos. They weren't just my children, they were my purpose, my anchor. Losing them was worse than losing the company or even my name. That ache became fuel. If I fought only for myself, maybe I would have given up. But for Mia and Jordan, I could not. I would take back my place, my name, and my children. For them, I would rise. When I first met Adrian, he was nothing more than a man with ideas but no direction. I believed in him when no one else did. I helped him find investors, polished his words before meetings, and opened doors he could not open alone. Together, we built something powerful. Or so I thought. Looking back now, I realized the signs were always there. Adrian loved control, not partnership. Every success was his achievement, every failure our mistake. I ignored the red flags, believing love would keep us balanced. Now I saw the truth. Adrian never wanted a partner. He wanted a ladder. And once he climbed high enough, he kicked it away. It wasn't just Adrian. Clara had always envied my position beside him. Valerie, with her sharp tongue, treated me as an outsider in my own family. Together, they became a circle of betrayal, feeding each other lies about me until even my children questioned my love. The cruelest part was not losing the company, it was realizing the man I had trusted with my life had been sharpening his knife behind my back for years. But knives cut both ways. The morning I walked into the office, I felt a strange emptiness. My name, which once opened doors, was now just a whisper in hallways I had built. My desk was cleared, my assistant gone, and a note on the chair simply said, "You're no longer needed." I couldn't believe my eyes. My own children, Clara and Jonathan, had signed papers transferring control of the company to themselves. Adrian smirked from across the boardroom, pretending innocence while the betrayal rang louder than a hammer hitting steel. Valerie, that snake disguised as a friend, laughed like she owned the world. My family, my legacy, my effort, they treated it as nothing more than a game. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers, but I realized something crucial: anger without strategy is wasted energy. They thought this was victory. They thought I was finished. What they didn't know was that I had already started planning my move. Every lie they told, every betrayal they executed, was carefully documented. Every weakness, every arrogance, they left traces. And when the time came, I would turn every one of those traces into their downfall. After that crushing morning, I didn't rush. Revenge isn't about anger, it's about patience, timing, and precision. I went home, walked past Clara and Jonathan, pretending everything was normal. They saw me smiling faintly and thought I was broken. They couldn't be more wrong. I opened my laptop, the one they thought I had lost. Every document I ever created, every contract, every hidden clause, they underestimated me. I started reviewing each detail, finding the gaps they had carelessly left open. These gaps would be my weapons. I called Adrian under the guise of a casual chat. He bragged about the company's new era, showing me the arrogance of someone who thinks they are untouchable. I listened carefully, recording every word. Every boast, every admission, they would all matter later. Then I made a list: allies I could trust, vulnerabilities I could exploit, and the people they had hurt along the way. Every tiny betrayal they had committed was a thread I could pull. By nightfall, I wasn't just planning revenge, I was building an empire of strategic strikes. They believed they won. I knew I had only just begun. I picked up small facts and made them loud in the right ears. The lawyer I trusted kept a copy of old contracts in his safe. I sent him a calm note asking for an urgent meet. He came with a tired face and left with a new set of papers I had labeled and signed. Next I found receipts that linked secret transfers to a shell company. The path ran to a hotel in another city where someone had paid in cash. I matched dates and names and put them in order. I called a reporter who had once helped a neighbor. I did not give the whole file. I gave a question and a copy of a receipt. The reporter called back and his voice changed. He said he wanted more. I met a helper from my old team at a cafe. We whispered and made backups on a thumb drive. We made sure the copies were hidden in places only we could reach. The plan was simple: show truth, not anger. When the first story hit the morning news, their faces turned pale. That pale was my first win today. I could feel the shift in the air. The boardroom that once ignored my voice now whispered in uncertainty. Elena Scott, they said my name like it was a warning. The first news article had landed, carefully calculated, and it was stirring panic. Emails were being forwarded frantically, calls made in secret. I smiled quietly, sipping my coffee, knowing every move I made was precise. My children's guardianship papers were next. I'd been gathering evidence of neglect and financial mismanagement for months. The court filings were ready, every document verified, every signature accounted for. The lawyer I trusted guided me through each detail, reminding me that patience was power. Meanwhile, my old company's accounts were unraveling. Suppliers demanded answers. Clients questioned contracts. Every weak link I had identified was now cracking under pressure. I sent anonymous tips, letting people connect the dots themselves. By the end of the week, calls from concerned executives flooded my phone. Their arrogance had been replaced with fear, confusion, and respect, not the respect I wanted, but the fear that comes before surrender. I paused, watching my plan unfold like chess pieces moving toward checkmate. I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine, I was rewriting the story they thought they controlled. And the tides had finally turned. Elena Scott, my name echoed differently now, charged with power. Every step I took was deliberate, every smile hiding calculation. The people who once sneered at me were scrambling, trying to understand how I had regained control. I'd kept quiet for years, watching, learning, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment had arrived. Inside my office, I opened the confidential folder I'd been building for months. It contained contracts, emails, and bank statements proving every betrayal, every lie my so-called family had orchestrated. I traced back every misstep, every manipulative action, and documented it. My lawyer had warned me, this could either destroy or save everything. I felt a thrill, the risk made it sweeter. That evening, I made discreet calls to the media and key stakeholders. Hints of scandal, mismanagement, and deception began to leak. Clients started questioning old agreements, suppliers hesitated, and my children's guardianship hearing drew attention. Even my kids, once distant, were beginning to see the truth. Slowly, carefully, I was reclaiming not just my fortune, but my family, my dignity, and my name. Every secret I unveiled was a step toward total victory, and I relished each one. They had underestimated me, and now, the reckoning had begun. The week had been tense, every phone call a battle, every meeting a silent war. Elena Scott, once mocked, once erased, was no longer invisible. I watched as my former allies stumbled, unsure how to respond to the information I had carefully released. Their arrogance had blinded them, my patience had sharpened me. That evening, I received a call from an old friend, someone who had once worked for the company but had been forced out by my children's schemes. Elena, she whispered, I've got proof you need. Everything, they lied, manipulated, and stole from you. This could end them. I felt a surge of energy, alliances I thought were gone were resurfacing. I met her in a quiet cafe, documents in hand. Each paper confirmed my suspicions, hidden accounts, mismanaged funds, and deliberate attempts to alienate me from my children. I studied every detail, every signature, every anomaly. By the time I left, my plan crystallized. This wasn't just about money or reputation, it was about justice. My children, my so-called family, had underestimated me. And now, armed with truth, I was about to turn the tide, claiming everything they had stolen. Elena Scott had never felt more alive. The documents I held were more than proof, they were keys to reclaiming my life. Hidden accounts, falsified records, and veiled threats had been used against me, but now they worked in my favor. Every betrayal was exposed, every lie documented. That evening, I arranged a private meeting with my children, under the guise of reconciliation. Their smug smiles faltered as I placed the evidence on the table. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. For the first time, they looked uncertain, vulnerable. Their power had always been in appearances. My patience and planning had shifted that balance. "You thought you could erase me," I said calmly, my voice steady but cold. "You underestimated how well I knew you, how well I understood the game you were playing. Everything you hid, every scheme, every betrayal, I see it all now." Their faces paled. Whispers of excuses stumbled out, but I ignored them. I wasn't here for explanations, I was here for justice. The rules had changed, and the player they had dismissed was now in control. Elena Scott felt a surge of satisfaction as I watched them squirm. My children, the very people I had raised, had betrayed me without hesitation. Their greed and arrogance had blinded them, and now they were facing consequences they had never imagined. I started reclaiming the company in small, calculated steps. Each decision was strategic, each conversation a trap. Board members who once ignored my voice now sought my approval. My children's allies whispered nervously, unsure if their loyalty would be enough to save them. I had anticipated every move, every reaction, every lie they might use against me. I also leveraged my contacts outside the company. Old friends, loyal employees, and allies I had once helped now rallied quietly behind me. I didn't need to shout, influence worked silently but powerfully. By the end of the week, whispers of my return spread like wildfire. The tables had turned completely. I wasn't just reclaiming what was stolen, I was rewriting history. My children's arrogance had become their undoing, and I, Elena Scott, was poised to regain everything they had tried to take. Elena Scott sat in her office, the city skyline before her, reflecting on how far the betrayal had cut. My children, the ones I had nurtured and trusted, had conspired with their partners to erase me from the company I had built with sweat and vision. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and I had been waiting patiently for this moment. I began pulling strings I had carefully hidden for years. Confidential contracts, hidden accounts, and evidence of shady deals that my children thought they had buried came to light. I shared crucial information with regulators and stakeholders, not in anger, but with precise strategy. Every revelation was a strike, each more calculated than the last. The company felt the tremor of my quiet yet potent influence. Employees who had hesitated before now looked to me with respect, sensing the shift. The arrogance that my children carried like armor was cracking. Soon, the world would know the full extent of their greed. I wasn't just reclaiming my company, I was taking back my dignity, my power, and my name. Elena Scott would be remembered, not as a victim, but as a force no one could ignore. Elena Scott's plan had reached a critical point. Every day, I observed my children's moves, their false confidence, and their careless errors. They thought their power was untouchable, but they underestimated the patience and precision of someone who had built empires from scratch. I started with the board members who had silently backed my children, presenting them with undeniable proof of mismanagement and unethical deals. Their loyalty crumbled as quickly as their influence. Whispers of doubt began circulating in the corridors, and the children noticed but didn't know how to respond. I watched quietly, letting fear and uncertainty take root. Next, I contacted key clients, those who had once trusted the children blindly. I revealed my involvement in the company's success, explaining how their decisions had endangered long-standing contracts. Slowly, the tides were turning. Calls for accountability began, and my children realized that the kingdom they thought they inherited was slipping through their fingers. This was more than revenge, it was justice. Every move I made was calculated, each strike precise, and each revelation tearing down their false bravado. Elena Scott was not just reclaiming her empire, she was rewriting the rules of the game. Elena Scott moved with silent determination, knowing that the most devastating power was patience. My children still flaunted their wealth and influence, unaware that their foundations were weakening beneath their feet. Every lie they told, every betrayal they committed, I had documented, stored, and weaponized carefully. I began reaching out to longtime investors, sending them meticulously prepared reports showing the mismanagement and reckless decisions my children had made. Their calls started coming in, not to my children, but to me. Panic spread quietly through the boardroom as doubts replaced their arrogance. Meanwhile, my children continued to act untouchable, laughing at imagined victories, blind to the storm building around them. I remained calm, observing, calculating, knowing that when the time came, their empire would crumble. Even my closest allies watched in awe as the seemingly untouchable heirs of my fortune started facing consequences. Every silent move I made brought them closer to desperation. By the end of the week, subtle cracks appeared in their confidence. Elena Scott was no longer just a mother fighting for her children, she had become a master of strategy, a silent force no one dared underestimate. Elena Scott watched silently as the chaos she had orchestrated began to unfold. Every connection, every secret, every betrayal my children had committed was now a thread in a web I controlled. They laughed at me, thinking I was weak, unaware that I was preparing the ultimate reveal. I started calling in favors from old friends and trusted business partners. Each conversation was precise, each detail calculated. Slowly, information about their reckless spending, broken contracts, and unethical maneuvers leaked to those who could impact their reputation. Their confidence, once so blinding, started to falter. At home, whispers began between my children, a tension they couldn't ignore. Their arrogance was replaced by suspicion, their smiles masking fear. Even the partners who had once seemed loyal now hesitated, unsure where their interests truly lay. I remained calm, like a conductor watching an orchestra, knowing exactly when each note would hit. The game was no longer mine alone, it was theirs too, and they were losing. By the end of the day, the first signs of panic appeared in their eyes. Elena Scott was no longer just a mother, they were beginning to fear me, and it felt exquisitely satisfying. The morning sunlight hit the office windows just as Elena Scott sipped her coffee, savoring the quiet before the storm. Today, the consequences I had patiently prepared for years would finally start to take shape. My children and their partners had no idea that every misstep, every lie, every betrayal was already documented and ready to be exposed. Emails, contracts, and secret accounts I had uncovered with the help of loyal allies were now being strategically revealed. Slowly, the dominoes began to fall. Business partners who once turned blind eyes now questioned their loyalty. Competitors who had underestimated my children's influence began circling, ready to take advantage. Panic settled in their faces, a reflection of the fear they had once ignored in me. At home, subtle cracks appeared in their relationships. Suspicion replaced trust. They whispered, doubted, and accused, unaware that I was watching, learning, and controlling every move. Even their closest confidants started hesitating, realizing they could no longer play the same games. Elena Scott didn't need to yell, beg, or fight. The power was in patience, precision, and timing. And as the first waves of their downfall hit, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. Elena Scott leaned back in her chair, letting the silence of the office amplify the tension she had carefully engineered. Today, whispers of doubt had begun to ripple through the lives of those who had once betrayed me. My children's arrogance and their partners' greed were now their own undoing. Every miscalculated decision, every reckless move they had made in my absence was being subtly exposed. Allies who had once supported them now hesitated. Contracts were delayed, deals fell apart, and even minor employees started questioning loyalty. The walls they built around themselves, of wealth, influence, and pride, were quietly crumbling. They called each other in confusion, blaming, accusing, panicking, while I watched with serene control. At home, tension tightened every conversation. Their smiles became forced, their laughter hollow. Every glance carried suspicion. Slowly, I saw cracks appear in their facades. They had treated me like I was powerless, erased my presence, but now, every secret I had collected became a weapon, and every weapon was poised to strike at the perfect moment. Elena didn't rush. She didn't need to. Their fear, their mistakes, and their own betrayals were unfolding like clockwork. Justice had a rhythm, and it was finally theirs to hear. Elena Scott stood by the tall windows of her penthouse, watching the city lights flicker like tiny secrets. Everything was in place. Every plan, every carefully calculated move, had brought her to this moment. The people who had stolen her company, humiliated her, and tried to erase her name were now blind to the storm about to hit them. Her children, once arrogant and careless, were now tangled in their own web of lies and failed deals. Each phone call they received carried tension, every business meeting ended with disappointment. Their partners, too, felt the weight of Elena's invisible hand guiding their downfall. She had not rushed revenge, she had built it slowly, like a master sculptor shaping marble. Elena felt a strange calm. Years of betrayal, heartbreak, and sleepless nights had forged her into a strategist, a force no one could ignore. Even those closest to her enemies, friends, colleagues, advisors, were now turning subtly, questioning loyalty. The silence before confrontation was deafening. She smiled faintly, knowing that soon, every secret, every hidden truth, every misdeed would be revealed. The reckoning was near, and it would be flawless. Elena Scott entered the grand boardroom, her presence alone silencing chatter and laughter. Faces she once trusted twisted in confusion and unease. The people who had stolen her company, her children's allegiance, and even her name were now trapped in a carefully orchestrated web of exposure. Every document on the polished mahogany table had been gathered meticulously over months: emails, contracts, secret agreements, evidence of betrayal, and shady deals. Her children shifted in their seats, their arrogance replaced with apprehension. Partners who had laughed at her downfall now avoided her piercing gaze. Elena spoke slowly, each word precise, cutting like a scalpel. She laid out their failures, highlighting every manipulation and deceit. The room's tension grew, thick as fog, as shock replaced confidence. This wasn't just revenge, it was restoration. Elena's calm, measured delivery contrasted with the chaos unfolding before her. Allies of her enemies tried to defend them, but each excuse crumbled under the weight of truth. She had anticipated every lie, every distraction. By the end of the meeting, the power balance had shifted. Elena's enemies realized too late that she hadn't just returned, she had returned stronger, smarter, and unstoppable. Elena Scott watched in silent satisfaction as the final pieces of her plan unfolded. Each betrayal she had endured, the backstabbing colleagues, the lies spun by supposed friends, the manipulations of her children, was now exposed for all to see. Publicly. Professionally. Socially. Her eldest child, once brimming with entitlement, now stammered under scrutiny. The partners who had claimed ownership of her company fumbled, caught in the evidence Elena had painstakingly collected. Every email, every hidden contract, every whispered scheme was laid bare, leaving no room for denial. Their smug smiles had vanished, replaced with panic and regret. Elena's allies, loyal and steadfast, observed quietly, impressed by the precision and patience that had brought this moment to life. No outbursts, no reckless moves, just calculated, silent vengeance that struck deeper than anger ever could. As the truth sank in, whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to murmurs of astonishment. The world that had dismissed her now acknowledged her power. Elena had turned humiliation into authority, betrayal into leverage. Every move had been deliberate, every step a reminder that the person they had underestimated was the one who had been writing the rules all along. Elena Scott felt a surge of triumph as she walked through the halls of her reclaimed company. Every office, every desk, every corner now belonged to her. The betrayal she had suffered, the theft of her company, the lies of her children, the attempts to erase her, had only fueled her determination. Her employees, once uncertain and fearful, now looked to her with renewed respect. She addressed them calmly, outlining a vision for the company built on transparency, loyalty, and resilience. Elena had learned from every misstep, every deceit, and she was determined to ensure that no one could ever undermine her again. Outside, the world watched the story unfold. Investors who had doubted her returned, captivated by her strength and strategic brilliance. The children who had tried to claim her fortune now faced the reality of her power. Elena didn't seek revenge for the sake of anger, she sought justice, restoration, and recognition of her worth. Each calculated move had brought her to this moment, standing tall, vindicated, and unstoppable. The game had always been hers, and now everyone knew it. Elena Scott sat in her office, overlooking the city that now recognized her as the force behind the empire. Every betrayal, every lie, and every moment of humiliation had led her here. Her children, once proud and defiant, were humbled. The toxic partners who had laughed at her efforts now understood the consequences of underestimating her. Letters of apology arrived, but Elena ignored most. Words meant nothing after years of deceit. Instead, she focused on rebuilding relationships that truly mattered, loyal employees, trustworthy allies, and friends who had never wavered. She realized that power was not just about money, it was about respect, influence, and the ability to shape outcomes. The courtroom battles, the public humiliation, and the strategic moves had all culminated in this perfect balance of justice and victory. Elena had taken everything back, not through chaos, but through intelligence and persistence. Sitting back in her chair, Elena smiled. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. She had transformed betrayal into strength, humiliation into strategy, and loss into triumph. The empire was hers, finally. Elena Scott stood on the balcony of her penthouse, the city light sparkling like the victories she had earned. The journey had been brutal: betrayal from her own children, manipulation by toxic partners, and the theft of everything she had built. Yet, she had endured, planned, and executed her comeback with precision. Her children had learned humility. They finally saw the depth of her intelligence and determination. The company thrived under her renewed leadership, stronger than ever, with a culture of loyalty and respect she had fought to restore. Elena's name, once tarnished in whispers, was now spoken with admiration. She had reclaimed her identity, her fortune, and her family's legacy. As she watched the sunset, memories of pain surfaced, but they no longer held power over her. Every betrayal had been a lesson, every challenge a stepping stone. Elena realized she was not only victorious in business but had also mastered the art of self-respect, strategy, and emotional resilience. The world had tried to erase her, but Elena had written her own rules. She was unstoppable, unbreakable, and finally at peace. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more powerful narratives, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what part hit you the hardest. Thanks for watching.